Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to have Terri Maxwell with us. She is new to my world and in some ways a soulmate. I mean, I just love what I'm seeing and learning from Terri. I'm part of one of her ventures, as she'll introduce herself, but the one that I'm part of is Shifco, and she's helping me really harness my gifts that I so yearn to bring to the world. So we're going to talk about respect, of course, but first, over to you, Terri. Welcome, and please introduce yourself to everybody.
Thank you, Bobby, and I'm honored to serve you and honored to be part of your community that you're building around respect. I have an interesting role, which I absolutely love. About 15 years ago, I started a purposeful Shark Tank is the only way to describe it. And I started investing in purposeful ideas. I was having this purposeful awakening, did not know what I was doing, didn't know how difficult it would be. But eventually it started to work. And then people started asking me to coach them. And then about 5 years ago, some of those clients pushed me to create Shifco. And today I spend about 60% of my time helping founders like you scale your good and be as successful and make an even bigger impact. And then the other 40%, I lead a team of leaders who lead our businesses. So I feel like I've got the best job in the world because it's the best of all of the things that I love to do.
I love it, Terri. You know, from my days in the corporate side, places like Microsoft for about a decade, to being chief people officer in between, and now fully a consultant on my own. I'm just seeing so many elements of the wisdom and strong sort of practices of places like Microsoft and startup, incubators. And you've just done an amazing job of bringing all that together with the one thing, I think, the thread that carries it through is human centric and that conscious business approach. So thank you for that. Really, again, it's such a thrill to be with you. So let's get into it. How do you define respect, Terri, in the context of the workplace and business?
It's a couple of things for me. One is that I see us as equal regardless of title. And so when I'm working with a team member that reports to me, I don't kind of play the boss card. I see us as equal, and their opinion matters as much as my own. And I certainly am often in situations where I need to make an executive decision that someone might not agree with, but they feel respected at every step of the way. They feel heard, they feel respected. So that seeing us as equals in a human viewpoint and listening to their input as we are equals, even understanding that sometimes I have to make a decision contrary to what they may or may not be kind of guiding for. That's to me first and foremost. And the second thing is really just, basics. Something my grandfather taught me when I was young. He was a guiding force in my early, very formative years. I had a very, very challenging childhood, and he was really instrumental in shaping my young mind. And he said, you get what you focus on and you get what you give. And those two lessons, which he taught me at different times in different ways, really became the entire framework for the way that I approach leadership. Is that I always focus on the good, and I don't ignore the negative, but I focus on the good, I focus on the value, I focus on the opportunities. And then we use those things to overcome the challenges that we have. And then the get what you give part is I want to give more trust. I want to give more respect. I want to give more responsibility to people. And in turn, I get more respect back. And so those are my guiding principles that really have shaped the way I lead and lead with respect.
I love it. Let's take that first one, Terri. I'm really intrigued by the quality of everybody on your team as equals. And I love the part, that you shared. Let's go a little deeper on that you still make that executive decision. Is it fair to assume that when you do that with something that's contrary to what the team or individuals were leaning towards, you also explain why and
Absolutely.
bring them along, right, on that decision?
And not only do and I'm going to come back to that because I frequently coach emerging leaders on how to do this. It's always the why behind the what and then the how. And too often we want to jump to the how. And so not only do I give my why, but I ask for them to tell me why they have an opinion different than the one that I have. And I restate what they say. I listen very carefully. And one of two things happen when I ask them, like, why do you believe that we should why do you think this person is ready for promotion? And I restate and I listen. And two things happen to me. One is it helps me understand how that person thinks and maybe where they might be a little off. They might be too influenced by somebody giving them praise or something along those lines. So it helps me guide where they are in their leadership development, which is, if you think about it, is really powerful. And then the second thing is it helps me frame maybe pieces that I'm missing. So by allowing them to give me their why, and me listening and restating, by the time I'm communicating hey, here's what I've decided, and now I'm giving my why, I'm actually able to work in some of their perspective in how I frame that. And at the same time, making those notes that this leader needs some development in certain areas.
Wonderful. The other angle on this that I'm hearing in that is you're also assessing or seeking to understand their motivators, so you can connect that decision making why with their motivators, right or wrong. They may or may not be aligned with the organizations, but at least then you're speaking in their language and towards them. I say this to leaders all the time, is you can't do one shoe fits all. If you have a lot of directs, you've got to get to know individual people and their motivators, and then speak to decision making, feedback for the individual based on their motivators.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is, I also believe you manage to the person, not to the position. But that notion of we're motivated by different things at different times in our evolution as a leader. I remember very early on, I was motivated by the goal, and I wore my team out in the process. And then I was motivated by the validation, and then I was manipulated in the process. And then I became motivated by the impact, which I think brings those two things together. And so what I'm always watching for is not just what are their personal motivation, but how are they being motivated in the role that they're in. And ultimately, I'm steering them towards being motivated by impact and value provided and things along those lines. But we still have to go through those other phases of their evolution. And rather than me judging where they are, I just need to understand where they are so that I can shape their evolution as a leader.
I'm hearing really getting explicit about what that stage is, and having them, confirm whether you got that right or not. Because I'm certainly guilty of doing that unconsciously and not even knowing what stage I'm at, and then can rub people the wrong way or not have that connect. By the way, for all our listeners, this topic is so relevant with something I see all the time, which is internal communication. That leaders and companies are constantly getting feedback from their employees and people and other stakeholders that, explain the why. Like, you make a decision, you don't tell us why, and you leave us in the dark. And very usually there are two responses from leaders. One is, oh, but we told you, we sent an email, or we did it all hands. The other is legal reasons, like, oh, there's certain things we can't say because the lawyers tell us, or governance. Often I'll tell you that those are the exceptions, and most things actually can be explained, right, Terri?
That's exactly right. And in my career, I'm 60 now, and I've been through a lot of situations, from helping take a company public to being taken over in a hostile takeover and having to lay off a lot of employees in that process, the dot-com bubble, the 2008 crisis. So, the just thinking about people as humans, that they're having a human reaction to whatever is occurring. Put those boundaries on it if need be, that I can't go into the details here, but here's what I can say. If you don't do that, they're going to fill in the gaps, and the way that they're going to fill it in is not going to be the way that you want them to perceive it. And you're going to have negative consequences: disengagement, disloyalty, frustration, your best people leaving. It's usually not the weakest players that leave. It's usually the best players that leave early in that process. So it's just better. My mantra in difficult times is I say the same thing 3 times 3 ways, so that people hear And that allows me to provide more communication without necessarily getting into something that, could be legally sensitive.
So Terri, I'm curious, actually, I think it's a good segue to the environment we're in right now, especially in the tech space where a lot of layoffs are happening, the impact of AI. And of course, like anything, there's so many factors involved and there's no one right or wrong way to think about it. But if our audience, I'm going to assume there'll be people who've been impacted either by those layoffs or are the survivors, those that are left. And then like Microsoft just recently, I mean, they've had back-to-back very large layoffs. That's the other side of it. How do you stay motivated? How do you stay connected with the goals that you have to achieve for the organization? So could you speak to both of that? Like what advice would you give for people who have been laid off and what they could explore, and those that are still there and continuing to deliver on objectives?
I'll start with the ones that are still there because I think they frequently get overlooked. And what I always encourage people to do when they're going through that is to get everybody on your team asking the question, who do we serve and what do they need from us right now? And by getting into that frame of mind, it gets people back focused on what they should be focused on, which is taking care of the clients and what the clients need. It gets them back focused on the value we provide rather than the work that we do. And ultimately, it helps people feel better as they're trying to recover from those difficult hurdles. So that is what I consistently find and advise companies to do, is to start framing that question, team to team, department to department, to get people back focused. In terms of when people get laid off, layoffs are just a part of the way business is done right now. And that is not going to change. The headwinds are very strong right now for a very rocky economic climate, a very uncertain economic and business climate. Not a fun thing at all, but it is just part of the way things are. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. So what I always did in my own life, and certainly when I went through times where we had to lay people off, is to say, how do we help ourselves be better on the other side of this? What does that look like? Better could be a job where I get to work from home. What does better look like for you? Maybe you would prefer a virtual work environment, and what are the options to do that? Better could be more work-life balance. Better could be a different industry or a different role. And so rather than focusing on what you lost, if you focus on what is this leading me to, this is happening for me, not to me, and what does better look like, and getting crystal clear on that, it shapes the way you search for new possibilities. And when you search for new possibilities with the idea of evolving into something better, those doors will open and open where you do end up in a better place. And then the last thing that I always say is the vast majority of jobs are not posted anymore. And they're really networked into. So once you know what that better looks like, figure out who the companies and leaders are that you want to follow and start building relationships with them. And you're much more likely to find a better job by building a relationship with a company and an executive than filling out a job posting.
Right. What I'm hearing is you're so pragmatic in how you lay that out. I'll make sure in the article version of this podcast, in the notes, we'll have literally those steps you laid out, because I think that's great guidance. And, it also points out this misnomer around soft skills being soft. There's nothing soft about soft skills. They're the hard skills, right? And I think we practice that. And that's what I'm also hearing in this is you've got to deal with the reality and you've got to look ahead, like look at the present and look forward. And you're bringing people in alignment with that. And there's an embedded piece in here around, yes, about serving the customer, whoever the stakeholders are that are the objectives of that role or team or company. The other is, though, let's talk a bit about purpose from a place of individual purpose. I've been a big proponent with all the talk about starting with why and purpose, that it doesn't have to be big or small, right? It could be taking the first person to the moon, or it could be picking up the trash because you're keeping the place hygienic. There's no judgment in either of those examples. Do you find that, for individuals to get clear about their why, their purpose, literally at a very personal level, and they may not even share it with others, brings that stability around how I navigate the choices I've made, how I empower myself to step forth again, in that case of the people who are still there in a job with lots of layoffs, to just get centered on why am I here and what's mine to bring in towards that serving the customer, right?
Yeah, I love that. And I have a very strong belief about purpose. Obviously, several of my companies are named on purpose. So, I started this Purposeful Shark Tank with Share on Purpose and Succeed on Purpose. So, um, and it came and it stemmed from my own purposeful awakening. But what I learned is purpose is a verb, not a noun. So too often we treat it like a noun, like, oh, I'm going to find my purpose and I'm going to make my job fit in the purpose. It's really not. Purpose is how you do everything. My purpose is to inspire potential. Everything that I do, even when I go to the grocery store and I smile at the cashier and give her a compliment, that is me inspiring potential. So when we treat our purpose as a noun and we treat our why as a noun, then we really miss the magnitude of it. But when you can find and distill your purpose down to just a few words, and it gives you that incredible clarity, and then you just start living from that place, and you know that this is mine to do, this is not mine to do, because it won't allow me to fulfill my purpose. Today, I can do that with clients. If a client wants to hire me in one of the businesses and I can tell I am not going to be able to inspire their potential, I'm not going to move forward with it. So it works whether you're in a corporation and you have that clarity as an individual, but it also works, if you're a consultant or a freelancer and you're really trying to do meaningful work.
My why is helping people connect with their humanity. Not even, yes, potential, but really first, if I can remember, especially when I'm in tough places, I love that because it just reminds me, oh gosh, I'm not being respectful. I've got triggered by someone else's perspective. How can I connect with their humanity? And I've said this several times on this podcast, but one of my favorite experiences is to be on a flight sitting next to someone who my first gut is, I do not want to engage. So I put on headphones. And then something in me says, oh, come on, say hi. They seem friendly. And always, every single time, I connect with their humanity, regardless of our viewpoints on different topics. So,
yeah, and I think it's two parts: perspective and getting a different perspective, and one part the actions that you take from that perspective. It's happening for you, not to you, means there's something better on the other side to it. If you approach it from that perspective and you define that something better, you're going to take very different actions than just filling out a bunch of job applications. Secondly, is be open to different realities. This is quickly becoming a freelance world. Maybe there's freelance opportunities for you that you never would have considered had you not been laid off. And you can actually not replace your income doing freelance work, and there's lots of platforms now that they'll match you with clients. So be open to different possibilities. Third is, as part of that, be open to different possibilities. Don't think that you have to stay in the same role in the same industry. If anything, AI and the economy and the political winds are causing things to shift at rapid pace. If you've got a real passion for solving problems, look for other industries where they're looking for problem solvers. Or if you have a real passion for creating value, look for different industries or different roles and focus on the value that you provide rather than the experience that you have.
I think we all know that concept of the value that we need to lead with, but you've just done such a great job of really breaking that down into a way to get to that for individuals. The other piece in what you're saying here is around, I'm seeing a parallel with what startups and marketers do, A/B testing, for instance. You laid out lots of options of how to think differently, how to shake up the paradigm and the frame set, right? So that if we keep doing the same thing, we're going to get the same results. By doing A/B testing, having a tight timeline to say, okay, I'm going to make this move. By the way, that's a term from Terri, move meaning very strategic, right? I'm going to, for instance, reach out to 50 people on my LinkedIn contacts of a certain profile and, test A and B on what I'm asking or how I'm bringing value to them. I think just all really applies. And we're living in an age which is so fantastic, where we have the tools to do those things that only large, multi-billion-dollar corporations could do, that we each are totally empowered to do that ourselves. Right?
Yeah, respect is universal. And I think what is interesting right now is countries as well as companies have culture, and we're really seeing that. We're really seeing those countries where respect is the core fabric of it, and we're seeing places where it is not. And I think the same is true for companies. So, this is a time where you get to make different choices about where you work and who you work with. Look for places where you're going to be valued and respected, and have a seat at the table that's appropriate to the value that you provide. So I'm seeing it's one of the most unique times ever. I did a research study, I think you might have seen it, of the conscious business forecast and how business is changing in the light of some of these interesting things that we're going through. But at the end of the day, what things always come back to is the value that you provide. And the beautiful thing about businesses that hold respect as part of their core value, they end up providing more value to their teams, to their partners, and ultimately to their clients. And I think that when respect is the foundation and the fabric of your company culture, you're much more likely to weather the storm and much more likely to keep the best people and keep the best people engaged.
Right. And value as in value we provide, but respect, of course, is on many corporations' top values. And often we see that, in my experience, you can walk down the halls of large corporations and they'll have posters and walls full of their values. I think, again, the human aspect is we know when we're experiencing respect and when we're not, or any value that a company puts their flag down on. And yeah, I think the guidance you've given really points people towards how do you really walk that talk and really hold respect as a key driving principle. Any parting thoughts, a top tip, or anything you'd like to share, Terri?
Yeah, I think the tip that I always like to share comes back to the success switch. I think to be a great leader and to lead with respect, you have to be able to regulate your nervous system, and learning how to do that so that you're not in fight or flight and you're not in reaction mode. So I would just say, find a technique that works for you to make sure you're calm and present in these difficult times, because it's much easier to lead with respect when you have a daily practice in place to make sure your nervous system is regulated.
I love it. And so, Terri, we could have part 2 sometime about self-respect, because that's also what I'm hearing in that tip. I won't put you on the spot right now, but for the audience, I'll check with Terri on some of these resources she's mentioned, the research, the tools, and we'll add them in the show notes. So thank you so much, Terri. It's been such a thrill to have you.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you for the work that you do.